One type of writing that you may be required to learn is descriptive writing. If you're writing a descriptive paragraph or a descriptive essay, the key to writing it well is using as many of the five senses as you possibly can in your description. So that includes explaining how something looks, how something tastes, if taste applies, how something feels, how something sounds, how something smells. Now, whenever you're asked to write a descriptive paragraph or essay on its own, you may have to choose a particular person, place, or thing to describe. But being descriptive can also apply to other types of writing. So if you're being asked to write a descriptive narrative, and you may want to watch the video on writing a narrative, you'll be asked to tell a story, but use a lot of sensory details as you tell the story. That's where the descriptive part comes in. So as long as you're trying to focus on the sensory details that apply to the description, then you're being descriptive. Now let's consider a particular setting that you may be asked to describe, or one that would be used for a descriptive paragraph or a descriptive essay. So this is a garden, obviously a very pretty garden. Nothing like the actual garden that I have at my house, which is more like a graveyard for dead plants. Anyway, this is a beautiful garden with a gravel path that appears. You can see people walking along and looking at the plants, the flowers. And so imagine for a second that you've been here. You've actually stood in this garden and you're choosing to use it as the topic for your description. So you want to describe a place. Think about what sensory details you would include in such a description. There are lots of things that you can include in this particular view of a garden. Of course, the way things look would probably be the first thing that comes to your mind. But notice that you wouldn't just say that it's green. To be as descriptive and as specific as possible, you would want to talk about as many of the colors that you see as you could. So you would maybe explain that there were different shades of green. You could talk about the different colors of flowers that you see. I noticed there are some that are very dark purple, there are some that are a light pink, there are some that are a warmer pink. And if you know the types of flowers that are in the garden, you can use that in your description as well. I don't know all the different names for some of these flowers, but if you did know, then that would be a part of your description too. You would also include how the gravel looks as part of your description because you're trying to give your audience the entire picture. You want to make it so that they feel like they're standing where you're standing in the middle of this gorgeous garden. So the light, warm earth tones of the gravel. You could also include sounds in this description because remember, we're imagining that we're here. So we would be able to talk about, maybe the sounds of birds singing if we hear birds, or the sounds of different bugs buzzing around the garden, the crunch of the gravel as you're walking down the path. Those all add to, the description to make it something that's more three-dimensional and not as though you don't want your reader to feel like they're looking at a picture. You want them to feel like they're actually there. So in addition to the way it looks, to the way it sounds, smell could play a very big role in this description. Because you're in a garden, you have to imagine that there would be lots of different types of smells, probably different perfumes coming from the flowers, and you would want to be as specific as possible about that. Not just say it smells like flowers. You want the reader to get a better picture. Do you smell honeysuckle maybe? Or on top of honeysuckle, is there the smell of roses? Some flowers stink, so you might, mention that you smell, an unpleasantly sharp smell coming from one of the plants or one of the flowers. You would also talk about, no, those are the four senses that you would be able to include. So you would talk about how it looks, how it sounds, how it smells. If you were going to touch a particular plant, you could talk about the texture of it and how it feels. That could be a little bit harder. Feel and taste are sometimes the most difficult to include in a description, but if it's reasonable to put them in, if you think it adds more vividness to what you're describing, then you should definitely try to include it as well. So if you're painting a picture of this garden to your reader, you want to include as many of the five senses as you possibly can. Let's look at an example paragraph describing a garden and see if we can kind of identify where the sensory details come into play and notice how it's organized in the topic sentence and the closing statement and all of that. So immediately we're provided with the topic sentence. So this explains what the entire paragraph is going to be about. One of my favorite places to relax is the public garden in my neighborhood. So I know that the place that the entire paragraph is going to talk about is this particular garden. And so as we go into the first supporting statements with specific details, we notice that there is actually a keyword here. They say, the person who wrote this says hear. I hear the soothing tones of birds nesting in the taller plants and trees. I also hear the soft droning of bees. So we have the sensory detail of sound that is in this first section. Notice how the person isn't really breaking up these sensory details. This particular paragraph isn't so much a descriptive narrative as just a description of the place. So the sensory details are staying together for whichever sense is being described. So anything that involves hearing is going to be in the same spot in the paragraph. There's nothing later that talks about hearing. Notice too some of the transitions that are helping this particular writer move smoothly from one sensory detail to the next. Here we have in addition to the sounds, so that lets us know that we're done talking about the sounds of the garden and we're moving on to the visuals. So now we have soft colors, which is something that you have to be able to see. Soft pinks and purples dot the bright green bushes in various places. So this section right here all has to do with the visuals of the garden, the things that the person sees, so the colors. And here's a nice kind of description as well. The purple petals of a nearby wisteria seem to drip over the earthy colored gravel. Wisteria flowers tend to sort of fall kind of in a cluster from branches of the tree. So using the word drip helps create the image. So even if you've never seen or you're not sure what a wisteria looks like, by saying that the purple petals seem to drip, you get this sort of mental image of flowers kind of falling almost off of the branches of the tree. Now we move on because we have another transition here to the way the air smells. Here we talk about perfume. So perfume is something that you smell. Those petals also perfume the air as I slowly walk by, helping to ease the tension of the day. So throughout this description, we notice that one of the points from the topic sentence, that of the garden being relaxing, is carried on throughout the description as well. Because here we talk about relaxing, and here we say soothing tones, which goes along with relaxing. Release the stress, which also supports the idea that this garden is relaxing. And here we have also ease the tension of the day, which again supports the topic sentence, that the different elements of this garden help a person relax. And then we close with a closing statement. I frequently enjoy strolling through the garden if I need to unwind after a busy day at work. So this reinforces the topic sentence that the garden is relaxing without repeating it word for word, which is something that you should always work on. Work on avoiding being overly repetitive whenever you're closing a paragraph or whenever you're writing a conclusion for an essay. So this is just a potential example of some of the different elements that you would be able to include in a description of a place.